Okay, so you decided to give the new input system a try. You open the package manager, search for input system and install it. Suddenly, this suspicious pop-up shows up. Blah blah blah. Doing so will restart the editor and will disable the old Unity Engine input APIs. Sounds a little bit scary, but you're committed. You press yes. Okay, Unity restarts as promised. You drag and drop your character into the scene. And what now? Here it comes, the hero of our episode, the player input component. You literally just add it to your character, click the Create Actions button and save the file somewhere, and boom, the component generated for you input actions. Short recap before we go any further. The new input system is event-based. That means that instead of checking the input every frame in the update method, you respond to the actual events, like mouse click or button press. No actions like that are defined by default. You define them in the input actions asset, which you can create by clicking right mouse button, going to create, and at the very bottom you will have the option input actions. When you double click it, you land in this window over here. There are several things you can create here, but only 3 are relevant for us at this moment. Action maps, which are collections of related actions. Actions, which are the actual input events like walk, move, look, shoot, and so on. And then their actual bindings. One action can have multiple bindings. For example, our walk action could have VSAT keys and arrow keys assigned to it. Each action has its own type. Value and pass-through are for continuous actions, and button is for one-time action like button press or mouse click. The continuous actions have also control type, which is nothing more than return type. For example, float or vector 2. If you would like to learn more details, you can check out this tutorial. The actions generated by the player input component are great, but they definitely won't be enough for your game. You can always add your own ones or modify the existing bindings if needed. Before you exit the window, make sure you save the file by pressing Ctrl S or clicking Save Asset button. On the player input component, we have several fields which are pretty important. Actions field, which is nothing more than just a field for our input action asset. Default schema and default map, which enable the selected schema and map by default, otherwise you would have to do it by yourself in the code. And then behavior, which defines in which way you want to be notified about the input events. The player input component can do much more than we'll explore in this tutorial. If you would like to learn more, you can always check the documentation. I will leave a link to it in the description. And by the way, I would really appreciate if you could like this video and leave a comment. This would definitely please the algorithm gods and maybe even make them show my videos to more people. Okay, let's make our character walk using those 4 behaviors. The character has a rigid body with the gravity set to 0, and the player controller script. Inside of it, I just grab the rigid body to the inDeawake method and store it in the private field. When the player input behavior is set to send messages or broadcast messages, you can handle the input by creating a method with a name on and then action name. So for the move action, the method will be called onMove. Then the method can have no parameters in case you are not interested in the value, but only in the occurrence of the event, or have the parameter of type input value in case you are interested in the value. In order to get the value from the parameter, we use the generic method get. So to make our character move, it's as simple as making the value.get vector2 and then times, for example, speed variable. So the broadcast messages works more or less the same way. From what I understand, the only difference between send messages and broadcast messages is that for the send messages, the player input component and your component that uses the input have to be on the same game object. For the broadcast messages, the message is sent down the GameObject hierarchy, so it can be handled also by the script on the children objects. To be honest, whenever I work with the player input component, I usually work with the send messages behavior. There is, however, one big problem with that. If you misspell your action or method name, it will simply not work. No errors, no warnings, or anything like that. So at times it can cause a little bit of confusion. The third behavior is Invoke Unity Events, and it deals with that problem very well. For each of your actions, it defines the Unity event. In order to subscribe to it, you have to have a public method with a parameter of type callback context. The context doesn't come with the get method, so we have to replace it with the readValue method, which works identically. Now we simply press the small plus icon under the event we are interested in, drag and drop our object, and then we have access to all public methods and variables on that object. This is pretty convenient. Notice that you drag and drop the object, that means it doesn't have to be the same object as the one having the player input component. That creates quite a lot of possibilities. The last behavior is Invoke C Events. And to be fair with you, I think it is terrible. Don't get me wrong, I love C events, but this implementation is pretty strange. Instead of events for each individual action, you have one common event. Let's have a look at that. First we need a reference to the player input, we assign it in the awake, and then on enable we subscribe to its own action triggered event. We do that with a method that accepts as a parameter the callback context. But now, because it's one shared event for all the actions, we have to branch out inside the method. The Unity's documentation about it is not really that helpful, so I haven't found any better way than identifying the actions by their name. And this has exactly the same problem as the send messages. Rely on strings, which can always be mistyped. But at the end of the day, it works. My personal favorites are the Unity events and the send messages behaviors. But of course you can use whatever you feel comfortable with. So now you know, the player input is the simplest way of working with the new input system. I hope you found this tutorial useful. Have a fantastic day, love you and bye bye.